All right, so on our assignment 4, we have just finished in the last video making a refined sketch version of, let me make sure I have it. It's good to organize everything, of my thumbnails, right? And remember, my refined sketch thinks in terms of black cutout shapes, whereas my thumbnails might not necessarily. So you guys see the clear difference between this and this? I have to make distinctions. You don't want your logo to rely on line art, because line art is not very versatile when it scales. You want to think of it as shapes and like the space between shapes to create your linear elements, so that it's very readable, even very small, in a way that line art is not. Okay. Then you can post that refine art right into assignment 4, because that's your first requirement. You don't need to post your inspiration like I've posted here. So refined sketch, that's your first requirement. I just saved it as a JPEG and I push it in. Now this JPEG, whether you did it with pencil and kind of filled it in and made clear your shapes, whether you did it in Photopea like I showed in the last video, as long as you just have a raster image of it, we can use that in our vector program. Now the professional vector program I usually use is Adobe Illustrator, but this is my freeware class. And if we're going to make a logo without paying for any program software license, I'm going to recommend this one. It's called Vectr.com or Vectr.com. And I have 2 links here. One is their user guide. So if you click here, we'll open up their user guide, which they've moved to Reddit. And then, unfortunately, because just the way Reddit is, you have to say read more. You have to scroll down. You can see just examples here, but I would kind of skip it. And then this is what matters. Like, how do you actually do stuff, right? And the main thing we need to learn how to do is how to draw our own vector paths. Now, if you start with common shapes, this is the part of the toolbar that's just like vector shapes in Photopea. And they have a lot more shapes that you can work with. So you can build it, and I'll show you that way. And then they show you different ways with little videos. But I'm going to go back. That's why I have that user guide linked to these drawing paths is the main skill. So this is drawing paths with the pen tool, which is like the all-powerful vector tool. That's true in Illustrator as well. Then when we get a little bit more comfortable, we know how to use the pen tool in just straight ways. We can go to part 2, and this will be how to draw curves using that pen tool. And then we can combine curves and straights to make closed paths, and then how to alter those paths. And then when we get busy enough with, or comfortable enough with that, we can go to drawing paths part 3, and this is my favorite tool. But it doesn't work great in Vectr.com. It works wonderfully in Illustrator. It's called the pencil tool. And this is for freeform paths. But you'll see that when you make a shape with freeform paths, instead of with shapes or with the pen tool, in Vectr.com, you get a lot of wonky, you don't get clean anchors. You get a lot of wonky anchors. It just basically plots like hundreds of anchor points. So I'm going to take you through it. But what you need first is a good refined sketch to base your drawing on. So I'm going to move that into my folder. I'm going to mark it with orange. I'm going to bring in my PSD as well. All right. So what you're going to do is you're going to click on Vectr.com. And then you don't have to have an account to use it, but it definitely helps. So I'm just going to sign in with my Google account. And what's nice about that is it's free. I don't need VIP access. And you'll see that here are some of the ones I've done in the past through this program. Right? And then you're going to say, open file. And you're going to notice that it says, when you hover over open file, it says open SVG. SVG stands for scalable vector graphic. When you save a vector out of this freeware, we save it as an SVG. But it also gives us an option for raster files like PNG, JPEG, or their own specific file type, which is a vector file, a VECTR file. So I'm going to open a file, and the file I'm going to open is going to be, I should have just kept it on the desktop, it's going to be my refined sketch. So I'm going to find it in assignment 4. There it is. So I'm going to open up a JPEG. How do I get this to go away? Okay, just click somewhere. So how do I know this is a JPEG? Well, if I do Command plus, just like in Photopea, I can see the pixels. Pixels are there. That's not great. So this is just my sketch. This is just what I'm going to build my vectors on top of. Just like when we did our landscape or our character or our creature design. This is going to be our template. So how do we play with it? First, we're just going to click on it. You're going to get this kind of a transform box around it. It's already sized well, but what I can do is I can take its opacity down. I'm going to onion skin this. I'm actually going to take it down to about 20% opacity. And then I'm going to look at layers. And I can see that my raster image is already a layer. And I'm going to lock it so I don't accidentally engage with this. Now, just like when you did vector shapes in Photopea to make your exercise 2 emoji, one way I can start this is I can use some of their pre-built shapes. And you'll see the basic shapes, but you'll also see a lot more. So one shape, let's see, is there any kind of shape that would be useful? Well, I'm just going first to just the shape tools, right? For mine, for yours, there might be some good shapes that are useful. Let's say that I want to use a heart. So I click on that, and then I just draw a heart, right? This is going to be my first vector. I'll see those under layers. You'll see there'll be a path. A path is different than a raster image. And that path can be modified. It has this little transform box around it. You can stretch it. You can hold down Shift, just like in Photopea, and you can distort it. The problem is it doesn't look much like a wing, right? So if I want to actually change it, I have to use some of these path drawing tools, which are underneath the shapes. And the pen tool is one of the most basics. So to see the anchors, you have to double click. And then, I shouldn't have gone to home. I don't know why I did that. Getting used to this. Okay. If you double click on any shape, you'll see these anchor points. And that actually allows you to modify those anchor points. So I can try to turn this heart by double clicking it and dragging these anchor points around. I can try to turn this into a wing. The problem is I'm limited to the number of anchor points it gives me. Does that make sense? Because I can, but not with just the shape tool and then just double clicking the shape tool. So when we want to add anchor points, when we want to draw our own, that gives us a new function. And that would be the pen tool in Illustrator. But in this, you just touch on the path and it will automatically create a new anchor point. What's tricky is, notice I'm not on the pen tool. I'm on no tool. So I'm modifying an existing shape. So if I want to add another one, I just click, and then I can modify that. And click again and modify that. And this is one way you can kind of build up your points. You can move them around. You can add them. You can even delete them. And you can change them. So we're going to learn all these kind of functionalities. And then if I click on it as a whole, this is called a large selection. It allows me to do things like rotate it and to scale it. Now what's the difference between this and my sketch is that this is a vector. So notice how as I zoom in, my raster sketch, I can see the pixels. My vector heart that's been modified is always going to be perfectly clean. So one way to go about it is to start with some shapes. Mine doesn't really work well that way. The other way is if we go to the user guide and we read more and we scroll down beyond just common shapes. We're going to go to drawing paths, and this is the pen tool. The shortcut for the pen tool is the V key. And if we click on the pen tool, and you click and then let go, it will make straight lines. The key is whenever you use the pen tool, you always want to close your path at the end. So if I want to draw this wing with the pen tool, I'm going to click on a corner, not click and drag, just click, then move, then click again, then click again, then click again, and you'll see it's always straights. If I wanted to create curves, like this curve, then I go to the end and then I click and drag, and that will pull out those handles. That will give me the curve. Now if I want to continue that curve, I'm good, but I don't want to continue that curve for mine. So I want to click back on the anchor I just did. That will close off that handle and allow me I'll do it after. Double click, get it. Now I'm going to alter this by holding down Control, right? And then I can alter that anchor point. So here's the benefit of the pen tool is it gives you total control of every anchor that you plot. The real pain of it is it's not super intuitive. This is actually what I recommend for starting out, learning it for the first time, and I need to learn it again in this program. I'm far more used to it in Illustrator. You can always hit Command Z and go back as many steps as you like. That's helpful. But start with the pen tool and then start only doing things with straights, which is exactly what they show in the user guide for starting out. But then make sure you close your path, which they don't do a good job of showing. So for this wing, I'm going to start here, going to make only straights. I can use as many anchor points as I want, but I'm going to rough it in with only straight lines. But then make sure you end where you began to close the path. And once you have a closed path, it will show it like this. That closed path, just like the heart shape, can be enlarged, it can be rotated. If you hold down Shift, it can be distorted until it's exactly what you want. But notice that when you make a closed path, it has two properties to it. Right now it's showing with a border, but not a fill. You see how the border has a check next to it and the fill doesn't? I like it this way until I'm happy with the shape. And once I'm happy with the shape, I swap them. So it has a fill, and I'm going to make that fill black and no border. They call it a border. Illustrator calls it a stroke. These are the properties. So I'm going to start it with a border and no fill just so I can see how I'm matching my sketch. And now I'm going to double click on it and I'm going to see what options I have to round out these anchor points. One option I have, which is really handy, are what are called the corner tools, which are these little dots that are on the inside of each of my hard edges, right? I can use those to turn them into curves. It basically rounds out the corners, and sometimes I want that and sometimes I don't.